I'm going to talk to you about why cultural difference actually are the management of perception, or to put it differently, why culture matters when we're working internationally. First, a bit of an introduction about myself. Who am I? As you can see, my name is Chris, my last name is Smit, my nationality is Dutch, and as they say, if you ain't Dutch, you ain't much. Or to put it somewhat different is, as a finishing touch, God created the Dutch. I know one more, which is more along the lines, more in reality, and that is the gods created the universe and the earth, and the Dutch created Holland. Maybe that's somewhat closer to the truth, because 2/3 of the country is actually below sea level. Now, if the country is below sea level, and where do I live? I live, of course, in a windmill like all the Dutch do. Where's my windmill located? It is below sea level. Like I said, 2/3 of the country is below sea level. And what do I normally wear? My wooden shoes and the traditional Dutch dress. But being in front of a significant civilized crowd, I decided to wear something different. Now, you can look at this introduction and ask yourself, what's the point? I'll tell you what the point was with this sort of introduction. I was trying to sort of border on stereotypes. Stereotypes that you might be missing about the Dutch are maybe the color orange, the fact that we never will win the World Cup football or soccer for the Americans, and maybe the red light district in Amsterdam, stuff like that. You can go to the Americans and talk about stereotypes there as well. What comes to mind first, potentially, maybe the word big, or the word hamburger, or trigger happy, stuff like that. Then you could go back to Europe and talk about the Italian stereotypes, or stereotypes about the Italians. What comes to mind? Maybe the word mafia comes to mind, mamma mia, the hand gestures that the Italians are so fond of, stuff like that. Are they all true or not? Are they all true or not? I think that stereotypes sort of display a general trend in society, and that's maybe more or less what culture is about. But besides from talking about stereotypes, my introduction is also based on humor, or at least I was trying to be funny. I'm not sure if I succeeded. I won't even ask you as well. I'm not going to shoot myself in the foot there. But if I show you this image here, and I would ask you, how would you describe the typical British sense of humor? So not per se what he is doing, but the typical British sense of humor. You might come up with ironic, with dry, self-deprecating humor. A Brit can stumble and fall and look back and say, hey, that was funny of me. Stuff like that. Contrast that with this person, and for those of you who do not know him, he's a Dutch comedian, singer, songwriter, presenter, quite a talented guy. And if you would characterize the Dutch sense of humor as opposed to the British sense of humor, you might come up with statements like blunt, direct, sexually connotated, and the Dutch tend to make fun of others rather than themselves. Whether they're here or not, that doesn't make much of a difference. And then finally, if you sort of wrap it all up, and if you would ask, if I would ask you, how would you characterize the German sense of humor, then it might come to mind, and I see somebody nodding already, no, they have no sense of humor. Is that true, however? Well, fundamentally, of course not. The Germans also have a sense of humor. But the contradiction in terms here is that humor for the Germans is a serious thing. Humor for the Germans is a serious thing. In other words, you don't start something serious with a joke. So to have a meeting, you don't start a meeting with a joke, because why would you undermine the seriousness of the meeting by starting it with a joke? There's a time and a place to be funny, according to the Germans. 3 countries, the UK, the Netherlands, and Germany, geographically relatively close to each other, and still they have a different sense of humor. I believe that jokes don't translate in language, and also that they don't translate in culture. So if humor is already not culturally neutral, my question to you to ponder on is, what is culturally neutral? I've done this work for about 18 years, and I haven't found anything that is culturally neutral. It touches us every day, and very often we don't really see it. But first of all, before I continue, there is really nothing good or bad about culture. There are only differences. That's important to realize. And understanding cultural differences are often the determining factor when you're doing business, typically when you're doing business internationally. The word culture has been mentioned a couple of times. Let's sort of put a frame around this and a definition. The collective programming of the human mind. In that definition, there are two words are important. One is collective, and the other one is programming. When we're talking about culture or cultural differences, we talk about groups of people and not about isolated individuals. And the second word that's important to realize in this definition is that the word programming is there because you're not born with your culture. Culture is so-called taught behavior. So collective programming of the human mind. Showing you an image here, my question to you is, what do you see? If you're like most people, you would see a face with the glasses, the nose, and the mouth, and a part of the chin and the neck, right? But if you read it diagonal and pause and wait a little longer, you would see that you can also read the word liar. The L, the I with the dot on the I, the A, and the R. So pausing and waiting and maybe looking a second time at a different culture might actually teach you a lot more. As I said, culture is about the management of perception. If you read the following quote, it's important for a manager to know the exact answers to most of the questions that his subordinates may raise about their work. I give you two countries and two percentages, the United States and France. Match up the countries to the percentages. All right, the answer is 18% for the United States and 53% for France. What this means is that if an American worker, if you want, goes to his manager, asks him a question to which he doesn't know the answer, the American worker is quite okay with an I don't know. While in a country like France, for instance, the answer I don't know from management doesn't give him a lot of credibility. So the expectation of a French manager is that he or she is much more knowledgeable about the content or stuff that he is actually managing. To explain this, we need two cultural dimensions from Professor Geert Hofstede's model of culture, one being power distance or hierarchy, and the other one being uncertainty avoidance. Let's start with the first one. Dealing with hierarchy. You could argue that all societies are unequal, but some are more unequal than others, or to put it differently, all animals are created equally, but some are more equal than others. I've given you here a list of countries, the Netherlands, Belgium, the UK, Norway, and China. Quickly make up in your mind which country you actually think scores highest, or in which country would actually score lowest. The answer to that question is you might be right about China, you might have guessed maybe the Netherlands being the lowest one, but in this case it is Norway. Quick word about these numbers is that anything more than 10 points difference is something that you would experience internally when you would go to that specific country. So if a Dutchman would go to Belgium, the Dutchman would experience that there is a stronger hierarchy in this country than in his own country. If the Belgian would go to China, the Belgian would actually experience that there is a stronger hierarchy in China than in his own country. Now, how does this work in reality? You see two triangles, and on your left-hand side you see weak hierarchy or flat and egalitarian. On the right-hand side of the slide you see that strong hierarchy, and it's called steep, and it's sort of hierarchical. Notice that the circles are equally in size on the left-hand side, and the top dog, if you want, on the right-hand side is bigger than lower at the bottom. Suppose you have this situation whereby peer-to-peer workers, say somebody from the Netherlands, asks a question to his coworker in China, can you give me an update on this and this process? What do you think is going to happen? It's highly likely that it will go up the hierarchy. This will take time. The perception that the Dutchman on the left-hand side might have of his Chinese colleague is that he might be lazy, he doesn't know what he's talking about, why is this taking so long, right? Eventually, the answer will come, but it just takes time, and perceptions are already shaped. Now, turn the situation around where you try to get the Chinese to ask the Dutchman, can you give me an update on this and this project? What do you think will happen? The Dutch, having a relatively low hierarchy, has the tendency to answer directly, and with the result that the Chinese colleague will actually wonder, how did you come up with that answer so fast? You're probably trying to cut some corners, and you didn't give me the right, correct answer. I'm going to ask you again. Hence the blue line going back that way. The second dimension to explain the difference between the United States and France is uncertainty avoidance. As they say in Germany, everything is forbidden unless it's allowed. You can continue like that, but in the UK, everything is allowed unless it's forbidden. The total opposite there. And in France, everything is allowed even if it is forbidden. And mind you, there is a fourth one as well, which is the Dutch version. In the Netherlands, everything is tolerated, even if it is forbidden. There you go. This talks about the amount of rules and structure that cultures and people within these cultures appreciate and would like to have. Again, which countries from this list, the Netherlands, Uruguay, Belgium, the UK, and Germany, do you think needs them or has or needs the most structure and detail? And which country do you think has the least amount of structure and detail? This is a very difficult dimension to actually understand, and the answer to this puzzle is that the UK scores the lowest of this list, not in the whole list of countries, and that Uruguay has a score of 100. Again, 10 points difference is something that is significant. The UK, a country that doesn't have a written constitution, but goes with common law, for instance. And for the Belgians present here at this presentation, the score of 95 explains to some extent why all Belgians are born with a brick in their stomach. Does that sound familiar? For a lot of you, it might be. Okay, if we sort of put that in a graph and in a practical example, what does that mean? When we look at project management in doing business, different cultures deal with with project management in different ways. So, on the horizontal axis, there's time, and on the vertical axis, there is action and implementation as a function of time. The line that you currently see there is just for reference there. Germany. First, Germany. How do you think the line of Germany will run? Well, Germans get their act together. They form a group of people, of highly specialized people around the table. They sort out all procedures and eventually will come up with a relatively rapid implementation, something like this. Now, when the Americans and the Brits come to the table asking the Germans, what are you doing? And the Germans look up annoyed at the Americans and say, we're planning. And the Americans go, well, what good is that for? Because the Americans have more of a just-do-it approach, a trial-and-error approach, and get going. And if you don't understand it at first, only then you start reading the manual. Continuing like this, take the country France, but you could also substitute here Spain, Italy, Iran, China, India, countries like that. The line is somewhat different, and I know it usually generates a laugh, but it needs a little note in the margin here, is that what the line should actually look like is pretty much at the beginning here, like a small tremor around the German line. So not with a big earthquake, but that's just a shortcoming of PowerPoint. My apologies for that. So what you see in a country like France is that there is a preference for doing things organized, but sometimes it just doesn't work, and that is because of the elbow work and the hierarchy and the in the corridor backstabbing political games going on. That's what the tremor is about. Now, finalizing this slide with the Dutch line, not that the Dutch are so important, it is just that the line is so significantly different from the Dutch, from the rest of the countries here. And the Dutch are known for their polderen or poldermodel, the Dutch word, or their consensus building. And the line sort of takes this shape. Right? And what you see going back in time is not really going back in time. It is more that it is doing project management with growing insights. So what we have decided yesterday could change today because of new gained information again. All right. Wrapping it up, this presentation with a quote from Carl Jung is that everything that irritates us about others can actually lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. Thank you.